Hello everyone, I'm Anu Bakar. Today, we are going to talk about automation of Azure Marketplace VMs on HCI using Bicep and GitHub Actions. A little bit about me before we get started. I'm a senior PM in Azure HCI team, and over the weekend, I love doing coding and art. You can find me at LinkedIn, and let's get started. We are going to cover the problem statements, solution, architecture, demo, and a summary. In this session, you will learn about Azure Marketplace VMs on HCI, how to create VMs and VM images using Azure Bicep template, and how to automate this with GitHub Actions. Let's start with the problem statements. Spinning up a VM is not a trivial task. You need VM images to set up one, and then you need to perform quite a manual steps. And many organizations scrutinizes the VM images that are custom built because of the potential security vulnerability and malware that can be ingested into the VM images. To automate this process, you need to switch to on-premises tools. To put this in perspective, let's consider a situation. Imagine you are in charge of VM deployments on HCI clusters. Regular requests come from your internal team for spinning up new virtual machines. This process has become effort-intensive and involves a series of manual steps. So you are in search of an automated solution. Also, importantly, you want to ensure that this process can be repeated reliably by any of your team members in your absence. Azure Virtual Machine is one of the most popular offer types in Azure Marketplace, and Azure HCI support Azure Marketplace VM images. Using Azure Marketplace VM images from Azure eliminates the need for tedious image preparation steps. Also, coming from a trusted source like Azure Marketplace ensures that you have the latest and the most secure VM images. With Azure Bicep, you can author templates to create VM images and VMs from Azure. To ensure that your team members can execute the same steps, GitHub Actions can be set up such that it runs automatically when the Bicep code is modified. This will help you automate the deployment of VM images and VMs from Azure. This is a high-level 60,000 feet view of the architecture. We have enhanced Azure HCI resource provider to work with Azure Marketplace in getting VM images onto your cluster and seamlessly integrate with Azure Arc for guest management. All of this is built on top of Azure Resource Manager, ARM, which enables you to perform these operations using Azure Bicep, template, CLI, SDK, and API, etc. Let's go through a quick demo. To download Azure Marketplace VM images, select your cluster and click on VM menu. Click Add VM Images from Azure Marketplace. There are three options. I'm going with the Marketplace option. Select the image which you want to download. We have onboarded few Windows Virtual Machine VM images over here. Select Windows Server 2022 Data Center. Proceed with the default options. You can review the settings and then click Create. Our goal today is to automate this process. Follow along with me. I've documented every step of my demo under this URL. Type in ak.ms/ashci/automate-bicep/GitHub Actions. I have defined the problem, scenario, and the solution which we discussed. Let's get started with the steps. There are a few prerequisites needed for this. You need the Visual Studio Code, Bicep extension, and the GitHub extensions. Let's start with the step number 1. Let's start creating a GitHub repository for storing your Bicep files. Click New Repository, give it a name. Here I'm using HCI Bicep demo. Keep it private and then click Create. Once I have created the repository, let me clone the repository onto my machine using VS Code. Open the VS Code and paste in the URL you just copied. Once you have set up the repository, open the folder. And now let's start setting up some of the GitHub workflow identities. So this needs certain permissions. If you don't have the permission, ask your administrator to execute this. There are two files which you need to copy: the workflow identity setup.sh and AID for cred JSON file. Let's copy the script first. Copy the command and execute into your terminal. Create a temporary directory to store these files. These are not required to be uploaded to GitHub, but I'm keeping it in the same folder for the ease of the demo. Once I have copied the script, let's copy the JSON. Yeah, both the files are copied now. Now, let's see what are the next steps. We have to change the variables which are defined in the script files. Those are the subscription, resource group, organization name, repository, and the file location. I'm going to open the file in VS Code, and I'm going to paste all of my variables for my local setup. I've copied the variables. Now, let's upload these files to Azure Cloud Shell and then prepare for execution. Open the Cloud Shell from Azure portal. Click on the upload option and then select the scripts which we just downloaded. Let's change the permission for the script to be executed. Copy the command from here and paste it into the Cloud Shell. Now the script can be executed. This will do certain steps. It primarily creates an AID app for the GitHub to authenticate and create the VM and the VM images. And it also sets up the RBAC permissions required onto the resource group. These are the three inputs which we need for the next steps. The next steps are to primarily create the GitHub secrets for all of these variables. So you have to go to your settings in your repository, select secrets and variables, and select actions. So these are the variables which will be available for the actions to be used when it is running. Copy the variable name, and for the value, copy it from the script output. Repeat the steps for Azure Client ID, Azure Subscription ID, Azure Tenant ID, and then the VM admin default password. The VM admin default password will be used by all the VMs as the default password while creating the VMs. These are the secrets which you don't have to share with any of your users, but it will be available for the GitHub actions to pull whenever it is running. Now that we have created all the secrets, let's proceed with the next step. The next steps are to create the Bicep files. And first, we will create the Bicep file to create the Azure Marketplace VM images onto your HCI cluster. Copy the code, create the folder named Bicep, and create the file and paste the content. Replace the variables to meet your specific environment needs. I'm going to paste whatever environment settings I have. In this case, I have two VM images. Instead, I'm just going to create one, and the script, the Bicep, primarily loops in to create images one after the other. Now that we have created the VM image Bicep, let's go ahead and create the VM creation Bicep file. This file also would enumerate through the array and create the VMs as per the configuration. Copy the Bicep code, go to your repository folder, create the Bicep file and paste the content. Once you have pasted the content, replace the variables as per your environment details. Now that I have copied the variables, let's go back to the next steps. Now we have to create the GitHub actions, which is used primarily to deploy these VM and VM images onto your subscription. So copy the code for the VM image deployment workflow. Create a folder .github/workflows/VM image workflow.yml. Paste the content and replace the resource group name as per your environment settings. Save the file, and let's now create a workflow file for the VM deployment, just like how we did for the VM image. Copy the content, create the VM image workflow file, and paste the content, and then replace the resource group variable. You can see here, both the workflows primarily uses all the regular actions, which are the checkout, which checkouts the file, logs into the Azure, and then uses ARM deployment to deploy the Bicep file using all the secrets which we have mentioned and the other environment variables. Let's see what's the next step. Now that you have set up all the files, let's check in these codes, and then we will start triggering the workflows. Copy the code from the terminal, open the git bash, and execute the git commands, which has been provided. This will basically submit all the files into your branch, and you can see the files in your GitHub repo after this. Let's switch to the GitHub repo and see if the files are checked in. Click on your GitHub repo, click on one of the folders to see if all the files have been checked in. As you can see, all the files which we have authored are now committed into your repository. Now, the next step is to execute these workflows. For this, you have to open your repository and then click Actions and select the specific workflow and then click Run Workflow. Here we are deploying the VM images first, so we are going to run the same workflow. Click the workflow to see where exactly are we in the workflow steps. Select the workflow and click on the deploy to further see further actions which are happening. As you can see, the code has been checked out in your GitHub action. The action logged into your Azure account, and now it's validating the template, and then it will trigger the template to deploy the VM images. In this case, I have just opted in to just create one virtual machine image. As you can see, the deployment got triggered. Let's switch to the portal to see whether the VM image creation have started. Select the cluster, go to the VM image menu. As you can see, the download of the VM image has started. Download of the image takes some time, so we are not going to wait for that. I'm going to fast forward this. The download is complete now. You can see the image is now ready. Now using this image, you can create multiple VMs. And in the GitHub Actions, you can see that the GitHub Actions also is marked complete. Let's see what's the next step. Once the VM image is downloaded, you can go ahead and create the VMs. Let's follow the same steps to trigger the VM deployment workflow. Select the deploy VMs and then run the workflow. As you can see, there are no virtual machines right now, and we are ready to trigger the workflow. Once the workflow is triggered, you will start seeing the VM getting created. Click the run workflow. Wait for some time to see the status. Select the workflow running status here. You can see that the checkout completed, login is successful, and the template is getting validated, and then it will start deploying. So the deployment got started. Switch to the portal to see if the virtual machine creation got started. As you can see, the status is accepted. That means the virtual machine creation request got accepted. It's in the process of creation. This also takes a couple of minutes, so we are not going to wait for that. I'm going to fast forward. As you can see, it got succeeded. Now it is running. You can drill down into the VM to further see the status of the VM and other details. You can see that the VM is created using the image which we downloaded, and it also has all the settings which we provided in the Bicep file. With this, you are now completed the significant part of the task, wherein you can now trigger the workflow from the GitHub Actions. In the same repository, I have further instructions to automate this such that whenever you make the changes to the file, these GitHub Actions gets triggered automatically. You can follow that to see for yourself. So in this session, we saw how easy is it to get started with Azure Marketplace VM images with a few clicks from the Azure portal. We didn't have to switch between multiple tools, and we can use the control plane calls of the Azure to complete our task. To streamline those repeated multi-click complex process, we used Azure Bicep to templatize the task. And this enables anyone in your team to execute the same steps, and finally to automate the end-to-end process. We looked at Azure GitHub Actions. I hope the session was useful. If you have any questions or issue, please share those via the GitHub repository I have shared. Looking forward to hearing from you. Thanks for watching, and bye-bye.